Today's car in Britain has one of the most infamous reputations of all. They were regularly stolen for joyrides, and those that didn't end up parked in hedges or next to trees were regularly stolen to be used in ram raids or in bank raids. It was based on the Sierra, a car that wasn't particularly exciting or stylish. Indeed, when it was first introduced in the early 80s, it really wasn't that well received. So how did this turn into one of the most iconic Fords ever made? Stick around and we'll also find out how Ford managed to make this a criminal's favourite, and how the more sought after version is actually the worst to drive on the road. The first thing that might surprise you is that Rover was directly responsible for this car's birth. Ford had done incredibly well in the 60s and 70s with the Escorts and Cortinas, and in the early 80s it was still winning with the Capri. But when the SD1 came out, it started doing rather well. This is what brought the Cosworth to life. It was Ford's mission to stop the Rover from winning, and it did. The Sierra, which at that point was still relatively new, was an obvious choice. Also because Cosworth had already done some work on a new version of the Pinto, which would have been a straight fit. And it was rear-wheel drive. The engine had an all-new alloy head with double overhead camshafts, 16 valves and a turbo for 204 horsepower. In 1986, that made it the first production car that put out more than 100 horsepower per litre. It was enough for a 0 to 60 of 6.2 seconds and 150 mile an hour top speed. The gearbox was a T5, which was also used on the Mustang, but because of the higher revving nature of the Cosy, it was specially fettled on a different production line by Borg Warner. The standard shaped Sierra was slippery, but it generated lift at higher speeds. Hence the picnic table rear wing, which is said to generate 20 kilos of downforce at 70 miles an hour. At one stage, it was the most stolen car in England, and Ford decided to make things easier for thieves by changing these to cylindrical locks in the later cars, a perfect fit for a screwdriver. In 1987, Ford made the RS500. This was a homologation special, only 500 were made, and this is by far the most valuable version of the Cosy. They were sent to Tickford for conversion. Body mods were relatively subtle, so it had vents here in place of the fog lights and a bigger grille to accommodate the upgraded intercooler. Superficially, the rear wing looked the same, but in actual fact, it had a different lip at the back here, which protruded a little bit less. And instead of going back like this, it came up at a sharp angle, and apparently it made a significant difference. It also had a little bib spoiler on the edge of the boot. The main changes were to the engine, which had a bigger Garrett T31 turbo, giving an extra 20 horsepower. But this actually made the RS500 worse to drive on the road because it had epic turbo lag. The chassis, as far as I know, was pretty much unchanged. There are even those who claim that the Cosworth was the most successful road-derived race car of all time. Are you ready for this? It won the DTM Japanese Touring Cars Championship in 87, 88 and 89, Australian Touring Cars in 88 and 89, British Touring Cars in 1990, and technically, really, it also won in 88 and 89. It's only because of weighed point scoring for non-turbo cars that it was denied the title in those years. It won an incredible 84% of all the races that it was entered in. But does that make it a good car to drive on the road? Let's find out. First impressions in the Sierra is that the driving position is nigh on perfect. The pedals are maybe a tiny bit offset to the right, but not enough that it would get in the way. The steering wheel is perfectly sighted, not too tilted forward or offset. And you have the gear lever exactly to hand. So we're off to a good start. One thing I love, which is a fault in one way, is but when you look at that rear view mirror, all you see is that massive wing. So So Ford had committed to taking 15,000 engines from Cosworth, and when they first presented this car to their dealers, they weren't very impressed, and they thought that maybe a maximum of 1,500 could be sold. Ford was quite worried, so they tried to reduce costs to the bone. That's why they were only offered in 3 colours: white, black and blue. And in terms of options, there was just 2 choices. You could have it with or without central locking and electric windows. That was pretty much it. Just over 5,000 of the original version were sold, but Ford then introduced the 4-door Sapphire Cosworth. That was easier to live with as a car. It also had a less extreme suspension setup, and they were really successful. They sold just over 13,000 of those. Standard cars weighed about 1,200 kilos. Apart from the very late 4x4, which was introduced really to try and help Ford win in the rallies, that was another 100 kilos heavier. Let's see what 200 horsepower of Ford Fury feels like today. And the answer is it feels very good. It's not mind-blowing by today's standards, and also this twin cam really is quite a rough engine, and it's rough everywhere. It's sort of rough even at lower revs, at 1,500, at 2,000. It's quite an agricultural feeling unit. It's not refined at all, but I guess it suits the sort of working man image that this car has. It's just no nonsense. It does the job, but it doesn't try and flatter you while it's doing it. It does have turbo lag, but provided you keep it sort of above 2,500, it's really not that bad. This is a low mileage car. It's only just over 60,000, and the dampers have been changed for Bilsteins. The steering's got that lovely feel that you get from older cars, so you know exactly how far you can push it. The interior is typical Ford of this era. The Cosworth, the only differences really were the seats and the sportier, smaller steering wheel. Apart from that, it's sort of gear spec inside. There's also the little RS badge on the side, which is quite nice. And these seats, has to be said, they are Recaros, and they are just so good. They're comfortable, hold you in place perfectly. But back to the interior. Saying it's like Lego blocks is being charitable. I think Duplo, which is made for younger children with bigger blocks, bigger rounded blocks, is more apt. All the switches are just so basic, but it's functional. The gearbox is really positive. It's not quick shifting in particular, but it's got a nice action to it. Let's just take it through the gears again, and we'll see how it handles the little twisties, which is where it should shine. A little bit more initial lean than you think there would be. Nicely balanced on exit though. If you're used to modern skateboard stiff cars, you'd find the chassis on this really quite supple. One of the trade-offs I think that you get is that there's a nervousness about it, which I hadn't really expected. So when you're on the straight ahead, it feels okay. The moment you load up the front with any inputs, you can feel that it's nervy. It's got that sort of racing edge to it. The chassis is McPherson struts at the front and semi-trailing arms at the back. Obviously it was stiffened for the Cosworth, but it also had a steering rack which was 2.6 turns lock to lock. Might explain why it can feel a little bit nervy at times. It doesn't maybe have the finesse of an Integrale, but it is great all the same. Car prices at the moment seem to be a little bit all over the place, but if you wanted to get yourself a Cosworth, looks like 25k would be the starting price for maybe a leggy Sapphire. And if you wanted a 3-door like this, they seem to start around 60,000, but go significantly higher. If you wanted an RS 500, they go for, it's hard to tell, but I think at least 100,000 and above. And there's been an outlier that sold famously, I think last year, for £600,000. I mean, that really is a one-off that shouldn't affect judgment, but certainly they are an incredible amount of money for what they are. It is iconic. I think it does look incredibly cool. It does drive well. But even with Scott, who owns this, he had one, I think, about 10 years ago, which he sold for £10,000. And he said that when he bought this for significantly more money, it really did hurt. I mean, he loves it, but he himself also says that the money asked for them seems to be a little bit crazy. I think one of the great things about the Cosworth is that it's so usable. Anybody could drive it. It's really practical. There's loads of room. And yet, when called upon, when you want to, it can deliver excitement. So it's a car with an incredible legacy, and there is also a final surprise for this. That is the car that replaced it, the Escort Cosworth, which is also held very much in high esteem. Well, in truth, it wasn't an Escort at all. It was based on a shortened floor pan of the Sierra, so it lived way beyond its time. Now, if you enjoyed this, you need to see my video on the RS2000, which is a really old school Ford fast hatch. I'll put the link there. Thank you so much to Scott for coming down today and bringing me his car, and thanks to all of you for watching.